Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We're here with Dr. Kendra Cheruvelil today, and she's a faculty member in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife and as well in Lyman Briggs College. And I'll let her introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her interests.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fisheries and Wildlife. As Dr. Cart said, my name is Kendra. I often tell the students they can call me Dr. C or Kendra, depending on what they're comfortable with. I am an aquatic ecologist, so I tend to study lakes the most, but a little bit of streams and a little bit of wetlands as well. And I've been in the department for about 15 years. I'm a full professor here, and I tend to get to interact with undergraduates mainly through guest lectures and informal activities. I don't teach any undergraduate classes, so this sort of thing is the way that I get to interact with you.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing currently.
Sure. I do big data lake ecology work. So what that means is if you think about people who are medical doctors treating individual patients, if you compare those sorts of people with an epidemiologist who studies whole populations of people and looks at human health at broad scales, I'm the sort of the epidemiologist for lakes. And so I study lakes across the entire United States. I've built a database that has about 500,000 lakes in it. And I'm looking at what are the patterns in lake water chemistry and water clarity and bacteria and that kind of thing over very broad scales of space and time, looking to see what happens with lakes when they're faced with climate change or a change in land use, for example. So you can think of me as an epidemiologist of lakes.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the lake behind me in my picture right now is a lake in Nicaragua. It's a volcanic crater lake.
Cool.
It's about 600 feet deep and only 5 kilometers across. But it has had some pretty serious changes due to deforestation in the watershed. And I think that, with the type of work that you do, it sounds like you'd be able to make some predictions at least about what might happen to this. And
Yeah, we don't have a lot of deforestation actively happening in the US like there are in countries like
yeah.
Nicaragua. But we do look at, go back, we have some limnology data. So limnology is the study of inland waters. And we have some data going back as far as about 50 years. And we have information on land use, such as how much forests are in surrounding lakes, how much agriculture, that kind of thing. And so we can look at the effects of changes in how we use land, how that then affects lake water clarity, for example.
Yeah. So how did you get started in this? Where did this all begin for you?
Well, depends on how far back you want to go. When I was 4, my parents moved me and my sister to a place that was on a lake. And so I do think that some of how I got started was just growing up on a lake and experiencing that lake on a day-to-day basis. However, I never thought I wanted to study lakes. I went to undergrad as a pre-med student. I always liked the outdoors, but I didn't really think about studying the outdoors until I was a junior in college, and I did something called a research experience for undergraduates, where I went to a different university and spent the summer working in a lab. And I didn't enjoy the topic that I was studying, but I really liked doing the research in the lab and being with a whole bunch of other undergrads and graduate students and postdocs. And so I decided that it would make sense to try to go on and get a grad degree to be able to do research like that. And so that's how I kind of got started, was this research experience for undergraduates, which is a program that still exists today, and there's places all across the United States that have these RU programs that you all could look into. They're pretty competitive, but usually people do them either after their sophomore year or after their junior year, and they're a really great experience. You get paid to do research and to learn all about what it's like to work in a lab or out in the field, as the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah, I really strongly recommend those for students, especially students thinking about graduate school, where there's going to be some independent research, because it's really a good gateway into some independent research. So,
Yeah.
um, so when we think about fisheries and wildlife and conservation and wildlife, fisheries and wildlife management in the 21st century, what do you think are or is the most pressing issue that we need to really be thinking about?
Well, there are so many pressing issues, of course, when you're thinking about environmental science. Um, but in the forefront of my mind is thinking about the ramifications of even COVID-19 and its effects on how we fund our natural resources agencies and the research that happens for our environmental ecosystems and our organisms. So, for example, here in the state of Michigan, as a result of COVID-19, most of the environmental agencies, the Department of Natural Resources, Eagle, these agencies, the people who work there are furloughed a day a week, and their budgets are being cut. They're talking about a 20% cut in their budgets. And so thinking ahead, if this sort of a cut in funding goes forward, say it lasts for 3 years, and what that means for our environment and the issues that we face when the people who are protecting and managing our resources don't have the resources that they need to be able to do their jobs. I think that's a huge, really pressing problem for the near term future. And it's something that you as students starting out in the Fisheries and Wildlife program will have to deal with when you're looking for jobs. And so to be able to engage with that sort of thinking early on and to really help the field as a whole be able to recover from this sort of experience, I think that's something that you're going to want to engage with right from the very beginning, so that you really know what it is you're getting into and you can help grow the field back to where we were and even better, to be able to really meet the challenges that we face. I think Dr. Urquhart was probably expecting me to say some kind of thing like climate change or land use change or spread of exotic species. And yes, those are all very important, pressing environmental problems, but we can't address any of those if we don't have the people and the money and the will to really go after them. And so to me, that's what's most important right now, is to really make sure that people's health and safety are secure, so that they can again turn toward how do we help the world as a whole and the environment as a whole, and make sure that we're doing what we can to move that forward.
Yeah, and one of the things we learn about in FW 101 is kind of where a lot of the funding for fisheries and wildlife research, fisheries and wildlife conservation comes from.
Yeah.
And with fewer and fewer people hunting and fishing and less sales of licenses and equipment that fund fisheries and wildlife, we are in a bit of a crisis, and that's going to be exacerbated by financial shortfalls due to COVID-19 and long-term economic problems. So you're definitely right that that's really a starting point for especially people looking for a job in the future,
Yeah.
because we need to make sure that there are jobs in the future. The work that we do is very important, and
Yeah.
we can't
Well,
do
and
it.
it's interesting because if you think about it too, one of the things that also funds our natural resources activities, right, is all of our Michigan has a wonderful state campground network, right? And all these campgrounds have been closed. They just finally reopened yesterday, right? And so lots of revenue lost through campgrounds this year as well. But the good news is, for any of you who camp, when you do a campground reservation now through the Michigan DNR online site, there's a little checkbox where you can add $1 to fund your parks. And so they are trying to come up with other ways to fund the work that they do, that I think will be, we're just going to need a lot of outside of the box thinking.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, the final question I've been asking everybody, and you had a little bit of advice in that answer for the students, but is kind of, what insights or advice do you have for students that, these are students taking FW 101, thinking about a career in fisheries and wildlife, or just getting started on their fisheries and wildlife major? what do you have to say to them? What would you encourage them to think about?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would talk most about is how important it is as a student to build relationships with your professors. And so, really taking the time and making yourself available to go to office hours, whether they be virtual or in person this first year, but to really start to get to know your professors. The very first time you go to meet a new professor can be nerve-wracking, right? You're meeting somebody who you've only seen on a screen or in a big classroom perhaps, and they're quite a bit older and maybe they know more about a particular topic than you do. But I would just say, remember that professors are people just like you, and just go in there with a couple questions that you might ask. So just like Dr. Urquhart asked me, you can go in and say, so how did you become interested in fisheries and wildlife? And just start a conversation with your professor. And we love talking to students. The saddest thing for me is when I have an hour of office hours set aside and no one comes. Like, I really want to meet my students and get to know them and be able to build those relationships so that I can sponsor students as they work through their academic program and as they apply for jobs or for research experiences or for graduate school. Like, that is one of the most rewarding parts of my job, is to be able to help students with those sorts of things. But it's very hard to do that if you've never come to office hours or you've never made that effort to get to know me a little bit so that I know who you are and what drives you and why you're interested in fisheries and wildlife. So that would be my one piece of advice: is get over the hump. The first time is the hardest, and just go meet each and every one of your professors this semester. Reach out, email them, go to their office hours. If you can't make office hours, email them and ask for a different time. Meet every one of them. And then say if you have 5 professors, maybe 2 of them you felt more of a connection with, then meet with them again. Make sure like you meet with them, say 3 times in that first semester to get that relationship going.
No, I think that's really good advice. And yeah, professors tend to, you know, we can be intimidating, but I think it's largely because some of us are a little bit challenged with social skills and such, and tend to be, you know, can be gruff, act like we're busy a lot, but nothing to me is actually more rewarding than, you know, talking to students about what gets them excited and learning, you know, about my students, because you know, we're in this ultimately to help students, you know, make the next generation of scientists that help solve a lot of these problems we're talking about. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon, and hopefully some students reach out to you with their interest in lake conservation and you know, kind of big data science as one.
I would love that. Definitely reach out. I can be one of those people that you make an appointment to chat with.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.